Welcome back, boils and ghouls. It is trivia time. It feels like it's been forever since we've got to talk. Now, I know the last couple episodes have been a little bit light, so this one is going to be something really near and dear to my heart, something extremely interesting to me. I get to tell you an actual real-life tale from the crypt tonight. That's not a play on words. Did you know that EC Comics had an actual vault of horror? No, I'm not talking about the title. I mean that there is a factual, real-life vault of horror. So to tell the story of that, we have to obviously talk a little bit about EC Comics. Now, some 70 years after their creation, EC Comics are often heralded as the high watermark among comics by many fans and critics. I'm kind of in that camp myself. But what is it that sets them apart from the competition? We're talking about a time when the stands were choked with what we now consider to be legendary titles, artists, and writers everywhere. What was it that made EC Comics so much better than the competition? If you talk to people, it boiled down to two things. First of all, the art was just better. The writing as well was a cut above everybody else. But what made their art better? What made their writing a cut above? And it really came down to an extremely talented stable of artists. And they were able to not only cultivate, but to retain an amazing pool of talent at EC Comics. How was this possible? Why did no one else achieve this? The key to this is William Gaines. And William Gaines is the key to unlocking EC Comics' real-life vault of horror. For anybody who doesn't know, William Gaines now is considered to be an incredibly important and pivotal figure in comic book history. However, at the time, he was fairly notorious, and there were two main things that were said about William Gaines that we need to talk about to tell the story of EC Comics' real-life vault of horror. The first is that William Gaines was essentially having been quoted as hating comic books. This is basically true, but I think this statement needs to be qualified. Now, when William Gaines inherited EC Comics, because he didn't start it or join it willingly, he inherited it from his father after an untimely boating accident. When he inherited EC Comics, it was not the entertaining comics that we know, it was educational comics. And if the name doesn't imply how boring those comic books were, let me tell you, they were even more boring than that. Essentially, they just reprinted anthropomorphic funny animal strips and Bible stories. And if that's what I equated with comic books, I would probably hate comic books too. Team that with the fact that I believe that while he was extremely modest and completely unegotistical in most ways, Bill Gaines was modestly proud of what he began to achieve with EC Comics. And when he began to become the face of the controversy, and then the Senate subcommittee hearings for the juvenile delinquency hearings happened, he was the face of juvenile delinquency in the United States, and he learned to truly hate comic books again. That should qualify that statement. The second thing they would say about William Gaines is that he was notoriously cheap. This is something that William Gaines himself even helped to repeat and propagate. At a time period where news coverage of comic books or magazines of any kind was fairly rare, I've actually managed to track down some video footage of William Gaines reinforcing this stereotype himself. So let's check that out for 2 seconds.
I just have to pick up my paycheck. In case you didn't know, we get paid scale.
His operation is cheaper than the so-called cheap price of his magazine.
You feel you're back in the Depression at the Mad offices? Neatness does not count, cheapness does. Gaines's penny pinching is legendary.
Now, the reason that William Gaines says this is for two reasons. I don't think he wanted to get taken advantage of, but I think the main reason that he said this is because William Gaines himself actually believed he was that cheap, and nothing could have been further from the truth. If you want proof of that, then we have to tell the story of EC Comics' real-life vault of horror. I promise we're there. So, let's go back and talk about how EC Comics, and specifically William Gaines and his partner in crime Al Feldstein, were able to get and retain such an amazing pool of talent out at EC Comics. They lived by a very simple principle: always pay the talent. This might sound like common sense to people these days, but at this point inside of the industry, there was a common practice that happened where you would essentially short somebody on pages or a cover, whatever it was, the writer and the artist periodically to save money, and the writer and the artist never really said anything about it. The publisher never really said anything about it. It was just kind of an unwritten rule that happened in comic books. But Al Feldstein and William Gaines said that. They basically ran their company on the complete opposite idea: always pay the talent. Now, that doesn't disprove the fact that William Gaines couldn't have been as notoriously cheap as even he claims to be. Back in the day, EC Comics was under fire from everywhere, and they were trying to get talent to leave EC Comics. And one of the things that they said about William Gaines all the time was that he kept all of the original art. And this sounds crazy to people who are younger now, who know how much original art is worth, but if you've watched the episode about Jerry Robinson, Golden Age Comics' greatest superhero, then you know that back then, original art was basically taken to the printer, and then if it wasn't disposed of, it was thrown in these horrible, horrible disheveled heaps where it just disintegrated. There are stories of people using that stuff in the studios to stuff the walls to stay warm in the winter, as floor mats, all kinds of terrible stuff. So what does William Gaines do? He keeps all of this stuff, and he starts his own real-life EC Comics Vault of Horror. Now, originally it started off as a closet in his office, but it quickly outgrew this. You need to understand that William Gaines lived in New York, and he didn't create the Vault of Horror somewhere else. No, he got a humidity and temperature controlled vault in New York. Imagine the premium that came at. And he created a Vault of Horror. And as I said before, while William Gaines was completely unegotistical, I believe he was modestly proud of what he had achieved with EC Comics. One of the reasons I believe this is because in this Vault of Horror, he had also lovingly wrapped a few copies of every single comic that EC ever put out in butcher paper, and these were all wonderfully preserved. So later in the 70s, when Russ Cochran came along and discovered all of this stuff and helped put out the reprints that we are all familiar with EC, and helped expose us all to this stuff again. And if you want to hear a wonderful story about Russ Cochran and how difficult it was to get this original art away from William Gaines just to make photocopies of it back in the day, check out the 2004 made-for-TV documentary, Tales from the Crypt, From Comic Books to Television by Chip Selby. It's a 2-disc special edition, great documentary. If you want to learn more about that doc, check out the Pulp and Popcorn episode that I did about it. But on that second disc, there's a great piece with Russ Cochran where he talks about how hard it was to separate William Gaines from this original art. And it's not because William Gaines was cheap, it was because he loved this art. He had been the steward of this art for so many years.
He would never allow the EC artwork to leave New York. So in order to do this, I had to go to New York, take the art from the vault under his supervision, take it out to a print shop and stay with it.
And the only reason he was letting Russ make copies of it is because Russ had made him aware of the collector's market that had basically sprung up around pre-code horror. And these guys who wanted all of this stuff but had never been reprinted, the company wasn't around anymore, they couldn't get it from anyone. So he wanted to make it available again. Now, Russ eventually made him also aware of the monetary value that the collector market would put on this original art and these sealed original butcher wax paper copies of the EC Comics. And he was coerced into selling them later in his life. Now, this is the final proof that William Gaines could not have been the cheap bastard that everybody claimed that even he himself included claimed that he was. He went, he sold this stuff at auction, and he tracked down the artists that had made the art. And I've never been able to find out if he paid them a set amount or part of what he got, or, you know, whatever, percentage, whatever it was. He tracked down these original artists and he gave them money. And this, we're not talking about a time period where he's like under fire from social media. There's no great fan outcry for him to do this. William Gaines just made money off of something he never thought that he never anticipated he would make money off of that art again. And he wanted to share it with the artists who made that possible. If that does not disprove it, the story about Reed Crandall most certainly does. Now, there is an EC Comics collectors panel on the comic book historians page, and it is absolutely great. There's a wonderful story that they tell about William Gaines and Reed Crandall, because unfortunately Reed Crandall had passed away in between the time period of creating this original art and William Gaines selling this stuff at auction. So what does William Gaines do? Does he throw in the towel? Does he give up? Hell no. Apparently it was not easy, but he tracked down Reed Crandall's sister. And when he tracked down Reed Crandall's sister, he was like, here, let me give you some money. And she vehemently refused the money. And not on, like, you know, grounds of anything like, oh, I don't take money for Reed stuff. She specifically said that William Gaines took such good care of Reed Crandall during his life that even years after Reed Crandall's death, his sister was not hurting for money. Now, William Gaines wasn't a perfect man. He had foibles. He was a person. We all make mistakes. And I'm sure that even inadvertently, he screwed some people over. He did some stuff that I don't always agree with, but he was a man. And he tried to be a good man. And in the end, that's the story that I wanted to tell. Because in the end, that's the story of EC Comics Vault of Horror. I hope you guys enjoyed, maybe even learned something. If not, tune in tomorrow, totally different fact about a totally different thing. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. If you really enjoyed what you saw, make sure you Hulk smash that subscribe button. If you do that, ding the little notification bell so you keep up with all these doses of trivia and stuff that I'm always dropping. Also, if you really like this, get down in the comments section below and let me know. If you want to see an episode about something, get down in the comments section below and let me know. I am getting ready to start my first ever round of viewer requested videos tonight. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks so much for sticking with me. And as always, I really, truly, and honestly ask only two things. Keep reading comics and keep hitting them local shops.